What's up everyone, this is Dariusz Kalbarczyk, co-founder of MG Poland, JS Poland and AI Poland. Welcome back to the Angular Master Podcast. Today we have a very special guest from Warsaw, Poland. He is a staff software engineer at Google. He's working on the world's largest Angular application. Ladies and gentlemen, Łukasz Jancewicz. Hi Łukasz, how are you?
Hi Darek, I'm doing great. How are you?
Perfect, thank you so much. So for those who don't know you yet, please tell us about yourself and what you do.
So I work in Google Warsaw office. Our team is developing large parts of Google Cloud Console, which is the application with which you access all the features of Google Cloud through the web interface. Specifically, I'm part of a slightly smaller platform team within networking, dealing with horizontal developments that are necessary while the other teams are doing the feature development.
So today's topic is migration. Why did you feel the need to do the migration?
So there were several reasons to do the migration. One of the reasons was business, specifically accessibility in the original AngularJS system was kind of a problem. It was not the main focus, and it would have required a lot of effort to have all parts of our pages become accessible. On the other hand, material components in Angular were built with accessibility as a first-class citizen. And so moving to using new Angular material components would bring us accessibility. Well, the most compelling reason was that AngularJS as a library was being replaced with Angular. And even though at Google, you don't really force people to move out of legacy libraries, because you can't just say from one day to the other, well, this library is not supported anymore. Your clients will see an empty page now. The deal that you get is you become the maintainer of the library forever, or until you migrate, right? So if you're the last user of the library, then you're responsible for maintaining it. And taking the cost into account, it was actually cheaper to move on to Angular. Also, you don't want to be on an old technology stack also from the personal and developmental point of view. People don't want to work on old technology stack. They're interested in the new. People that you hire are educated on new technology stacks, and they're actually better prepared to work with Angular than to work with AngularJS after a certain point of time passes. So even from the people's perspective, it was a good idea to migrate.
Amazing. So what benefits did you see in Angular?
So as I already said, one of the reasons to migrate and the benefit of Angular were the more mature material component libraries, which in their Angular version were more convenient to use and also more accessible. Another reason was performance related. AngularJS was designed in a way to be really easy to use and to write administrative-like web applications quickly. Performance was a secondary goal. Now, Google Cloud Console, being one of the largest applications written in Angular, had its share of problems with performance. And Angular promised many ways to address certain performance issues, such as change detection loops. So this was what we were looking forward to when we were migrating to Angular.
Why were you hesitant to proceed with the migration?
Well, AngularJS and Angular were technically very different frameworks. And the amount of changes necessary to migrate from AngularJS to Angular was so big that it was practically more of a rewrite than a migration. That meant that for 2,000 pages and about 2 million lines of code, the effort required was really, really big. There were also a lot of unknown unknowns, meaning, well, we knew some problems would appear, for example, how to do routing, both in Angular and in AngularJS at the same time so that they don't conflict. But we didn't know what else would break if you apply such a migration to a big application like Cloud Console.
How did you plan the migration?
As I already said, we had about 2,000 separate pages in that application at that time. The idea to stop all development for 2,000 pages and then tell people to do the migration only looked good to developers, but it looked terrible to product managers. There were clients who needed new features on our pages. There were new products being introduced that needed a web page to be able for users to be able to use them. So it was completely impractical to freeze it all and just spend time on rewrite. We had to do this piecemeal. What it meant was we needed two engines, AngularJS and Angular, running at the same time, with some pages already working on Angular and some pages searched still from AngularJS. And so we had to do this page by page and actually migrate traffic of users either one page at a time or, a few pages at a time.
So how did you decide which page to migrate next?
So we had a few different approaches. One approach was product-driven. If there was active development on a particular page, there was actually more motivation to migrate to Angular for that page. Multiple reasons. New development usually meant we could make use of the new Angular material libraries that were available in the new version. And also people were more familiar with the code base. It was relatively fresh. For pages that were not really changed anymore, we could wait longer with their migration. And also there was a technical approach where, because of the unknowns of the migration, we wanted to migrate the easy pages first. The reason to migrate an easy page first is that if you uncover a problem while migrating a small, easy page, it's relatively simple to isolate the source of the problem. Whereas if you have a complex, big page and there is a problem, there can be multiple reasons why this problem occurs. While migrating small pages, we built up knowledge base and the playbooks on what to do and how to solve particular issues so that when we came to more complex pages, we were ready for them.
How were you able to parallelize the work?
Well, that kind of did itself automatically. Google Cloud Console is developed by many, many teams across geographies, and each team is responsible for a set of pages. Since we already established that we're migrating page by page, each team was doing their own. There was some central coordination, but there was a lot of independence.
So how did you make sure no bugs were introduced?
So as I said, we were migrating page by page, and the usual way Google does feature development, which was also used here, was rolling out an experiment. So you might have heard, when you're reading the news about Google Maps and some new feature, and the news site usually says, this feature is rolling out to users over the next 2 weeks. That basically means that in our case, we had 2 pages. One was the original page in AngularJS. One was written in Angular. When we decided that the Angular page was ready to launch, we would slowly move traffic, user traffic, from the AngularJS page to the Angular page over the course of 1-2 weeks. So let's say on the first day, 10% of users already use Angular page. We wait 2 days. We make sure that all the metrics are correct. We ramp up to 50%. Then after 2 more days, let's say we ramp up to 100%. If there's anything wrong, we can always roll the experiment back.
How did you maintain feature development velocity?
So in every team that was responsible for pages, we usually split into 2 subteams. One team was delivering features because there were business needs on the pages still. And another team was doing the migration. And so in order for these 2 subteams not to interfere with each other, there were some rules in place. For example, when we started migrating a certain page, well, we had to make a copy of it. So we were effectively maintaining 2 pages doing exactly the same thing. That was a burden because any feature change would need to be applied on both changes at the same time. So we made a deal that we're trying not to touch, not to modify pages that are under migration. And feature teams were encouraged to work on other pages in that time where a certain page was being migrated. This was not always possible, but in the rare cases where there was a real business need to do some emergency fix, well, we paid the tax of doing that twice, and this actually worked out pretty well. The consequence was also that we tried to minimize the number of pages under active migration. So the fewer pages we had under migration, the more freedom the feature team had to develop business features on other pages. Yeah, and this allowed us to have pretty good velocity, even though the migration was going on.
Sounds really good. Did you use any automated tools?
Sure. So there were 2 ways in which automated tools helped us with the migration. I already told you about planning the migration. We wanted to do actively developed pages and easy pages. Actively developed pages, we don't need automated tooling to do that. We know what pages we're focusing on. However, how do you determine whether a page is easy to migrate? It's not always trivial because the amount of code in the template or in the page component written in TypeScript is not necessarily a good indicator of whether the page is complex. You need to also look at all the components that it uses and all the services that those components use, and recursively until you get to the very end of the dependency chain. And here's where automated tools can help. So we had nice scripts that went through our code base. They could recognize whether a page is written in AngularJS or in Angular, or whether both copies exist. And so they would mark certain components and services as migrated, and they would build a graph of dependencies and find the page with the smallest number of unmigrated dependencies, including its own source code. Then the tool would count that page as the first page to migrate, assume it was migrated. Now the graph was updated with that page having been migrated, and the tool was on again. Now we try to find another easiest page, and that meant that we had a nice prioritized list of pages, good candidates to migrate. And this is a very good source to go to the feature team and ask, hey, look, this is our proposal of 10 next pages to migrate. Is there any active development? Are there any issues? Would you like us to reorder this just a little bit to fit the business needs better? And this collaboration worked fine. So that was one automated tool that helped us, that was planning. Another automated tool was the migration itself. As I said at the beginning, AngularJS to Angular is more of a rewrite than a migration. And so there was an idea to write a program that would take the Angular page, template, and script and generate automatically a working Angular page with exactly the same business logic. This idea was proposed by a senior engineer, and it's actually a very funny story because I spent a few days and wrote a few documents that refuted this idea completely. And then I built a team and delivered this tool in another year. So it's funny how something that doesn't seem possible becomes possible later.
So tell me more about the automatic migration tool.
Sure. So the tool in its concept was really rather trivial. An AngularJS page is composed of the template and the controller. The template is written in HTML and the controller is written in TypeScript. In order to manipulate those, it's best to convert them to AST trees, so to their internal representation. So we used one library to parse the HTML into an AST tree. We used another library to parse TypeScript into an AST tree. And now we had a set of rules. Rules meaning simple translations that would traverse the AST tree, find matching patterns, and replace them with different patterns. You can think of this a little bit like regular expressions, except we were not working on strings. Instead, we were working on pieces of an AST tree, on nodes. The translators themselves were pretty easy. For example, imagine one translator looked at an HTML code, and if it found an ngIf, it would translate it to star ngIf. And we did that for both core Angular features, like ngIf, and also for the components libraries that we had as Google Cloud. So we had originally for AngularJS version of Google Cloud Console, we had a set of common components that we were using across the console. And we had the similar set of common components prepared for the migration. You can think of those components like a table or a message box or a button. They were custom made for us. So we needed custom made rules to translate the AngularJS version to Angular version. Those new versions of components were designed to look similar and had a similar API, but it was not exactly the same. So sometimes some arguments names were changed, sometimes argument types needed adjusting, sometimes you needed to add or remove certain parameters. This is what those small migrators do. So I told already about the HTML part. Similarly, we had the TypeScript part, where, for example, when you had a controller, so now in Angular you had to add a decorator at the top, you needed to reference the template, and on and on and on. Exactly the same stuff, except in TypeScript. And the main logic of the migration tool was that it would just have these translations in a certain order. It would try to apply them, and then it would try to apply them again until it ran out of translations that did anything meaningful. So if the translation finally resulted in no code changes, then we would declare that we are done. We spent about a year developing this tool with a small team. And on our test files, it worked 100% of the time. So it would actually take a working AngularJS page and produce a working Angular page that didn't need any manual corrections. Then we applied it on our code base. We migrated about 2,000 files using this tool. And it would not always do its job 100% of the time. I'd say it did 80 to 90% of the work. But that was already a very big improvement, because what the tool also did was migrate tests. So each component had the template part, had the TypeScript part, but also there was an accompanying unit test suite. Google is lucky to have a very strong unit testing culture, and so we had really good unit test coverage. So when we had a tool to automatically migrate unit tests, even if it didn't do its job 100% of the time, now the developer's job was pretty easy. So you run the tool, and then you try to compile the tests. They didn't compile. Okay, so you went in and you corrected the few places to make the tests compile. Now you run the test. Well, they fail. Okay, so you correct your code until the tests pass. This process can take, I don't know, a day, maybe two. It shouldn't take more than a day or two. This means you have a migrated, working, tested page in a really short time because you used an automated tool to do 90% of the job.
That sounds really good. So how did you avoid scope creep?
So to set the context, scope creep is when you're doing a migration. It usually sounds like a great idea to say, oh, well, since you're rewriting this page from scratch, maybe you can also upgrade this other thing along the way. For example, we were using this legacy connection to the backend, or we were using this other legacy library. Why don't you just do all that because you're effectively rewriting from scratch? This is a terrible idea. The reason why it's a terrible idea is because the migration is difficult enough. If you expand the scope, then if something goes wrong, again, you don't know what the source of the problem is. It's also a bad idea for other reasons. For example, it makes the timelines of the migration completely unreliable. You don't know when you will finish because people come to you and they add scope to your migration and your timelines get longer and longer. And we wanted to finish this as soon as possible because there were business needs on the pages. There was some scope creep that was kind of part of the migration. For example, along with Angular, we introduced a more reasonable, rigid URL scheme to our application. Whereas we were using string-based URL scheme in AngularJS, in Angular, we were using an object-based URL scheme. So we just built a migrator rule that rewrote those URLs to the new scheme. But for many other requests to add scope to the migration, we said no. And it was actually easy to say no thanks to the automation. Because the automated tool didn't care about additional features, it would not migrate them. And then, as I already said, the development process was run the tool, fix the tests, and you're done. There was no good moment to do the additional work. And so the problem kind of solved itself. Also because we had the planning tools that told us what page to migrate in what order, that also gave stakeholders clarity on the timelines and the progress, and they were less insistent on adding some scope.
How did you track the process?
So that's a very good question. How do you know when you're done? How do you know when you can delete a JavaScript file, right? For a page, it's easy. You, as I said, you migrate the page, you launch the page over a week, people are happy, you wait 2-3 weeks, maybe for some bug reports, no bugs come, excellent, you can delete the page. For a service or a component, the answer is not that obvious, right? So maybe this component is used on multiple pages, or even it's used in multiple components that are used on multiple pages. So you have a set of subcomponents and services that need to exist in 2 copies for a long time, but you want that time to be as short as possible. A naive method of measuring your progress would be how many pages you've launched to Angular versus how many pages are still served on AngularJS. It's not an ideal approach to measure because you're not counting the work that's left, you're counting the work that's been done. Well, it's the work that's left that's important. So here's another idea on how you can measure your progress. You measure how much AngularJS code is left. You can divide this code into 2 groups. AngularJS code that's 100% in AngularJS, and AngularJS code that already has its Angular equivalent. Think those supporting services and components. And so, you also measure your team's velocity. You look at how many, let's say, lines of code of AngularJS they were able to migrate in the last month. And then you look at how many lines of code are left. You make some multiplications and divisions, and you come up with a nice estimate of how much work is left. So we had some automated tooling to do that, where it would go through all our code and looked at what AngularJS pages and components and services are still left, counted their lines of code, divided per team. Then we plotted a nice graph, and we could see this migration will end in 3 months, 4 months, depending on the amount of work left. And so what we had was basically a burn down chart of the number of AngularJS lines, and we were trying to bring that down to 0. An additional benefit of looking at work left as opposed to work done is that when you're using automated tool to do that, you uncover pieces of functionality that you would have otherwise missed. For example, there are certain supporting services which are not explicitly listed as dependencies anywhere, but they're crucial for the system to work. And it's possible that you might miss them when planning or executing your migration, whereas when you use an automated tool to count it, it will just find those files. And then you will stop and think like, hey, why is this here? Why can't I see any direct dependencies of it? Oh, right. So this is an additional piece of work. And we actually, when we started doing this more rigorous tracking in the way that I described, we uncovered a significant piece of code base that we forgot about.
What were the most troubling issues you encountered during migration?
Remember how I told you that we needed to serve AngularJS and Angular at the same time in the same application? That was challenging in of itself. But also there were problems with caching of information. So let's say a user opens Google Cloud Console and the page that they first visit is still served from AngularJS. In order to see that page, they need, for example, to download some information about the project that they're looking at, or permissions that they have, or any other settings that are universally useful and don't depend on the particular page that you're looking at. Now the user clicks a link and navigates to a different page within Cloud Console that's now served from Angular. That new page in Angular also wants to use the information about the project, the permissions, etc. This information already exists in the AngularJS app, but the Angular app doesn't have access to it. So the naive way to do is to download all this information the second time. But this means a degraded user experience where the user needs to wait because Angular page needs to download exactly the same pieces of information. One way to fix this is to have a shared cache that exists outside both AngularJS and Angular world, where you put information both from AngularJS and from Angular, and then when the Angular page is loaded, it can take stuff from the cache, it can also put stuff in the cache, as long as objects in that cache are not dependent on Angular version and are binary compatible, you get the benefit of performance. So that was one thing that we had to think through and implement.
Are you happy that you migrate?
Yes, definitely. So after migration, we had all the benefits that we were promised. So our pages were much easier to be accessible. We got the performance benefits that we wanted. and we got the modern design system of the components. So we were pretty happy.
Any plans to rewrite to something else again?
No, not at all. So we're sticking with Angular, and Angular also changed their upgrade philosophy. I think there was a little bit of bad press for Angular for doing the things the way they did when they migrated from Angular version 1 to Angular version 2. And I don't think they made the mistake ever again. I also saw the Angular documentary movie, which I highly recommend to everyone. It goes into the business needs and the multiple reasons why the Angular team made the decisions they made between version 1 and 2. And so I don't believe another such large migration is coming. There are smaller migrations. For example, right now we're thinking about migrating to standalone. We're thinking about migrating to signals. There are many much smaller migrations that are happening in the Angular world, and Angular library is actually much more supportive right now with the ng command line tool, allowing you to upgrade your Angular version almost seamlessly.
How do you keep improving your skills as a software engineer?
I always like to learn how things work underneath. And so when faced with a problem, I try to dig deeper and understand the system inside. That helps me both solve the problem in a more correct way and also learn. At Google, I'm pretty lucky to be able to contact both the core Google Cloud Console team to get expert advice and also to interact with the great people in the Angular team. And this helps me grow a lot. I also spent a large chunk of my time evangelizing and educating people. And in order to teach, you must first really well know what you're going to talk about. So that is also a way to deepen your expertise.
Exactly, 100% true. What motivates you to stay productive and inspired in such a demanding role?
So you could say there are two sources of inspiration. One is the educator role that I told you about. It feels good and it's really satisfying to be able to share what you've learned with others. And in order to be able to share, you need to actually know something other people don't. So that's a huge motivation for growth. Another one of my hobbies is, making a small world around you better. I'm not talking big plans. I'm not talking saving the planet with Angular. But if you're given a choice.
By the way, why not? Why don't you save the planet with Angular?
Okay, honestly, I have never thought about whether Angular can save the world. It certainly can save a lot of people a lot of time. But going back to what I was going to say, if you see a problem, like an API that's not ideally designed or a bug that surfaces on your page, you always have a choice. You can fix the bug for your page, or you can fix the bug for everyone. You can upgrade the API for everyone. You can remove the legacy code for everyone. You can define everyone however you want. You can say, I am going to fix Angular and then fix everyone. I'm going to fix everyone in Google Cloud Console. Or maybe, at least, I'm going to fix everyone on my floor in my building. The larger the scope, the better the satisfaction. So I'm always trying to find a reasonable balance between here's the job that I have to do, and here's the world I can fix. Let's see how much I can do to improve both my life and everyone else's. And if you succeed in fixing a little bit more than necessary, then it gives you a huge satisfaction.
Amazing. What's one thing about you that most people don't know?
Okay, I am throwing myself under the bus a little bit here by saying I'm an amateur piano player. But please don't ask me to play the piano on NG Poland.
Oh, that would be good. That would be good. I play the bass, so we can...
That's nice. Cool. Let's not go there.
Okay. Your favorite travel destination?
Japan, hands down. I've been to Japan, well, it was 15 years ago now, and I'm going back in 3 years, already getting excited. And you might ask, why 3 years? Because I'm planning to take my kids and my sister's kids, and it's really hard to schedule a flight in April because you want to see the blossoming cherry trees when, one is finishing 8th grade and has this kind of exams, another is finishing high school and has that kind of exams. You can't just take any April. It must be a specific April where nothing is happening.
Okay. Łukasz, thank you so much for this amazing talk, amazing podcast. Having you here is always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Darek. It's great to be here.